Welcome everybody to Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. We're going to go right down to the University of Virginia. We've got Jennifer Lawless. She is the chair of the Political Science Department. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, I'm happy to join you.
It is a busy time down on college campuses as you wrap up the semesters and head towards commencement. So an extra special thank you for joining us today. Let's go right to Washington, D.C. via the Republic of Korea. The Republicans split off three votes and joined with the Democrats. The Democrats were finally going to have a victory in the United States Senate on the issue of tariffs over Donald J. Trump. One problem, Sheldon Whitehouse was not in the country. He had been in a conference in South Korea and was traveling back. The resolution lost 49-49. How does this even possibly happen?
Look, I don't know people's travel schedules. I don't know how long that was on the books. I don't know how long they knew the vote was going to come up. It's certainly unfortunate for the Democrats, but what I would, call attention to is that the Senate alone can't pass any sort of legislation, so it probably wasn't a huge policy fail. But it's certainly not ideal, especially when the Democrats are trying to demonstrate that they're unified, that there are certain cases where they can get a few Republicans on board and try to put the brakes on Donald Trump. In the broad scheme of things, I think it's probably not determinative.
So two things. Back in my day, when I was a young staffer in the United States Senate, both for a Democrat and a Republican, voting was important. Like, you're supposed to show up and vote. It's kind of central to the job. Going to conferences in South Korea, less so. Good for mileage purposes and extra points. Less so, though, for demonstrating leadership in, the American democracy. Here is a chance, though, that Democrats haven't had a win in 3 months in the Senate. If you know there's an issue like this coming up, you're working on it, it's co-sponsored by both a Democrat and a Republican, here's your chance, and you're not in the country.
It's not good. But I also think that given that the legislation was co-sponsored by a Democrat and a Republican, the likelihood that it was going to be a one-vote margin was probably pretty small. I don't know, again, I don't know what was involved in the scheduling. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes. I will say that my understanding is that his attendance record is generally quite solid, so I don't think this is a pattern, but it's certainly something that an opponent at some point will be able to hit him on.
I think he's very lucky that he's not up on this cycle, because maybe not a Republican's going to beat him in Rhode Island, but that's certainly good eating for a primary opponent
Maybe,
who might
but I
take him on.
think that one missed vote, when it ultimately doesn't matter because the House is not behaving the way that it would need to behave, is not enough to get you thrown out of the United States Senate.
All righty, we'll jump over. Gina Raimondo, in a speech, in an interview with David Axelrod, said that functionally she's considering running for President of the United States. I think for all of us who know her, that's not a big surprise. That is an early statement, though, right now, with nearly 4 years away. Talk about that maneuvering and what it means for her to even utter those words so early.
Well, broadly, I think the fact that anybody is willing to utter those words so early highlights how competitive and how crowded this primary field will be. There is no question that there will be dozens of Democrats emerge who think that they can take on J.D. Vance or whomever the Republican nominee will be. And by positioning themselves and trying to come out of the gate early, they're hoping to do two things. The first is to ward off potential challengers who might occupy the same lane as them. And the second is to signal to donors that they're going to be calling very, very soon. Anybody that was successful in the Biden administration, anybody that is a Democrat in the United States Senate, any Democratic governor would be crazy not to take seriously the idea that 2028 might be their year.
And for her, who did come out of, there's different views about her in Rhode Island than different views in Washington, D.C., did come out of the Biden administration with, a glowing profile on 60 Minutes, with given pretty much bipartisan credit for getting chip manufacturing returning back to the United States, getting out billions of dollars to a lot of American corporations that can only help her with fundraising in the future. Where does she sit in the world of, potentially literally 24 Democrats who may be aspiring to be the next president of the United States?
I would say qualified and credible, but unlikely to emerge in the top tier. She does not have a national profile, despite the fact that she was Commerce Secretary. She did not have a national profile as governor. She's competent, she's qualified, but there are going to be a lot of show horses out there who also enter the race who have national name recognition. And when there are a handful of those, it's really difficult for the workhorses to break through and get that kind of attention. So it's not impossible, but it's also not a mistake to put feelers out really early and test the waters, because she would not enter that race as a front runner.
And how far down, if we say there's, let's just say 15, it's kind of similar to the last cycle when Joe Biden won the nomination in 2020, there was about 15 Democrats who started off as potential candidates and ultimately became candidates. In 16, the Republicans had so many candidates they had to do 2 nights of debates on a regular basis, or 2 panels of debates on a regular basis. Is she in that? Did she make the first stage, the first 6 that might be up on the stage, or is she at the earlier hour, at the 4 o'clock blue plate special debate?
I think probably the 4 o'clock replayed special debate for a couple of reasons. The first is she doesn't currently hold elected office, and she's not currently able to use her political profile to bring about any kind of change. So any current governor, any current Democratic member of the United States Senate who's interested in emerging can position themselves to get a lot of media coverage and attention right now. It's not to say that she can't do it, but it's more difficult. And so when you have Cory Booker and Andy Beshear and a lot of these other, current elected officials, Gretchen Whitmer, who are considering a run, JB Pritzker, it's just difficult to see how to break into that tier, given that she doesn't have a platform from which to do it. Again, it's not to say it's not possible. One of the reasons that Nikki Haley was the last candidate standing going against Donald Trump last time around was because she was the first one out of the gate. She cultivated supporters. She really, really carved out a lane for herself. And even though she was not currently occupying any position of political power, she used every single day leading up to that primary, that first primary, as an opportunity to introduce herself to voters. So it's possible. It's just not the easiest path.
All right, let's jump over to Washington, D.C. The National Security Advisor, Michael Waltz, is out, according to the New York Times earlier today. This ties back into him connecting an editor at The Atlantic to a highly, highly confidential, I'll use confidential, chat on a embedded platform that was discussing an attack on a foreign country. He kind of took the hit for including the editor. Is this the first of many? Trump has always had a pretty short leash on many of his appointees, and he has not fired really anybody to date so far in the first 100 days, but is this the beginning of a number of change-outs?
It very well could be. It's also excellent news for Pete Hegseth, who probably is the person who should be fired over this, especially given that there were additional conversations that he conducted in the same ridiculous way. But the fact that Trump is not backing Waltz, the fact that there is somebody who's actually being held accountable, speaks to at least a little bit of a change in the administration. I think it's not a coincidence that we heard yesterday as well that Elon Musk is, these are his final days. This might be a time where we see some change outs and we see a little bit of recalibration.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to 16, Michael Flynn, a Rhode Islander, graduate of the University of Rhode Island, he didn't make it very long. I think he was right around 100 days, 120 days. Went
I think it
quickly.
was like, I think it was a lot shorter. I think it was like 30 days.
It might have been. It's all a blur over the past decade, so we put these things in some level of context. Uh, uh, as these things take place in Washington, Trump's gotten some pretty significant bad financial news, unemployment upward, the stock market's been down significantly, especially since his tariff announcements, a lot of sort of chaos on Wall Street, and then really the most significant bad numbers came out this week. Consumer confidence down to a low, it takes you back a number of years, and also GDP falling significantly, a really bad number for the growth of gross domestic product. What do these things mean? And he can push them off and try and blame them on Biden, but when they're good numbers, he jumps on them and claims they're the Trump effect each time. How does he maneuver these numbers? And then correspondingly, how is it that the Democrats don't take advantage of this? I understand they've got to go to South Korea for important conferences, but simultaneously they might want to talk about some of these issues as well.
I'm not even dignifying that with a response. So I think that there are a couple of things. The first thing that the Trump administration is doing, as you mentioned, is blaming Biden. The problem is that it's not just the economic numbers where Trump is beginning to suffer in the face of public opinion. His approval ratings are significantly lower. Importantly, he's lost about 10 points among white college-educated voters and about 13 points among voters under the age of 30. The margins in those two groups were a large portion of why he was able to claim victory in 2024. So that's concerning. It's not just that Democrats are becoming energized to oppose him. There are a lot of independent voters who are pretty turned off. But beyond the economy, if you look at polling numbers on almost every issue at this point, a majority of Americans do not approve of the job that he's doing and don't agree with the positions that he's taken. They don't agree with his position on deportations. They don't agree with his position on birthright citizenship. They don't agree with his position on not funding medical research. They don't agree with his position in trying to politicize and take over higher education. These might not be the issues that are the most important to voters, but coupled with the fact that there's also declining consumer confidence and concerns about the economy, you can't really manage to lose people on all of these other issues that were basically just feathers in your cap leading into the election. Now, what the Democrats have to do is craft a strong response, and I think we're beginning to see that. It's taken a while, but public opinion is beginning to shift. There are more and more elected officials who are vocal about what's going on. Elizabeth Warren has been on the circuit lately. AOC and Bernie Sanders have taken their show on the road to far more than just one or two rallies. Various members of the Senate have been, basically putting together a package of policies that they think fly in the face of democratic American values. And so it looks like people are beginning to craft what a response would look like as we head into the 2026 elections. It's taken a while. And the Democratic attorneys general remain very, very committed to putting forward litigation whenever they can. And the courts are beginning to put the brakes on a lot of what the Trump administration wants to do too. So I don't think the Democrats should rest on their laurels at this point. We're still far from a position of strength, but it looks like various pieces might be coming together. And it's largely because of the chaos and uncertainty that Trump has generated. It's not because there's this great strategy on the part of the Democrats. Trump might be his own worst enemy.
I'm going to push back a little bit on this. The American people care about almost nothing else other than the economy. He is failing at these first 100 days on the economy. There's uncertainty, loss of consumer confidence, 401ks are down, and worries about job losses. That's what's driving the dissatisfaction with these Trump policies. The other ones, pile them all up, they don't matter.
No, so I agree, but I think it's interesting and important to note that it's not just on the economy that people are getting turned off. That might not be how they make their decisions at the ballot box, but it does suggest that on a wide range of issues, people are not happy with or congruent with the policies that the administration is pursuing. And when that's the case, that means that there are far fewer people who are even single issue voters not on the economy that he can depend on. And so, these are the ingredients that the Democrats need. Even if it's just a really small segment of the population, these are the ingredients that the Democrats need to be able to win in 2026. They're necessary, they're not sufficient.
How do the Democrats, though, develop a economic policy other than hoping and praying that Donald Trump's policies fail? Because
they don't have to for 2026. So for 2026, they don't have to because he's president and the president basically runs the economy. And so all they need to do is highlight all of the disasters and all of the implications of Trump's economic policy and what that means. That's not going to be enough for 2028. But heading into the midterms, this is his economy, and the Democrats just have to make sure that voters are associating it with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to suggest that it's still the Joe Biden economy and it took too long for him to, claw his way out. But the economy looked a lot stronger when Joe Biden was president than when Donald Trump was.
Will the Democrats be able to get a decent, functional spokesperson who can rebut things? I mean, listening to Chuck Schumer, your close friend, it is literally fingernails on the blackboard listening to Chuck Schumer talk about the American economy or almost anything else.
I wish I was well connected enough to call Chuck Schumer a close friend. I think we're beginning to see a handful of people coming out and speaking. Elizabeth Warren, I think, is one of the clearest, most coherent voices among Democrats. She doesn't have presidential ambitions at this point anymore. And so being a spokesperson, being able to explain things in a very clear way, and also not seeming like she's completely out of touch with the average voter is helpful. I think.
Yeah, listen, we get all of her press releases, both from the Senate committees as well as from her office. They are the smartest, best crafted, regardless if you agree or disagree with her, they're the best written, thoughtful, most thoughtful documents coming out of anybody in government today. And I agree with you 100%. She is busting into sort of being that statesperson who can be a counterweight to the Trump administration for the Democrats.
Yeah, we'll see if she's able to maintain that. It doesn't look like there are a lot of other Democrats lining up because they want that job. So, I think that's helpful. The other thing is the Republicans have already painted her as a liberal whack job. There's not much more they can do to chip away at Republican support. And so she doesn't have much to lose, and I think she has quite a bit to gain.
Could she be the next Democratic leader in the United States Senate?
I think that would be a really, really smart move. We saw with the, announced retirement of Dick Durbin that Brian Schatz from Hawaii is, opting for that position. It might well be that, Elizabeth Warren will become, the next Chuck Schumer. We'll see.
Let's jump over to GoLocal's had a series of stories, another one today on gubernatorial candidate Helena Foulkes. The one today really ties a number of different strings together. This goes to the so-called Dodd Center at the University of Connecticut, named after Helena Foulkes' uncle, who she's quite close with, Chris Dodd, and her grandfather, Thomas Dodd, who's passed away. Both were United States senators for long periods of time. Both left the Senate in significant controversies. And this ties in how Sacklers donated consistently into the Dodd Center. Jonathan Sackler, who's been pegged as one of the cause of the opioid crisis, died a couple of years ago, but he was on the board with Helena. Also this sort of political consultant to Chris Dodd, Stephen Kinney, longtime close associate to Chris Dodd, but also simultaneous lobbyist for Purdue Pharma and sort of the man on the job for the Sackler family. She, after coming on GoLocal Live in January of 2022, said, "I'm angry. When I learned about what Purdue Pharma had done, I was angry at what they did." But when running for governor, she's taken multiple donations from their lobbyists, who she knows is their lobbyist. This is not new information for her. How does all this work out?
I'm a big believer in you're not judged by the company you keep, but if you're not going to be judged by the company you keep, you better differentiate yourself from that company. And she's not doing that. So if she wants to say, look, do not judge me based on who my uncle is. Do not judge me based on who my grandfather is. Do not judge me based on the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma. Do not judge me based on my role at CVS. These were mistakes that I made. These were relationships that I had. These were connections that were unfortunate. Say that. Silence just feeds this general sense that she's in bed with all of these people. And maybe she is. I don't know. But she's certainly allowing a narrative to be written that I don't think is particularly helpful for a gubernatorial campaign. That's certainly not very helpful for voters who are looking for a fresh face and new ideas. And that's certainly not helpful if you want to vote for somebody that you think holds themselves up to the highest levels of integrity. So I think the silence and the just sort of, oh, I'm so disappointed kind of language needs to be supplemented with a little bit more substance.
With that, let's jump over to what should we be looking for? We're in this tremendous period of sort of financial uncertainty. The markets don't know what to do. They kind of bounced back yesterday, but it wasn't on the overall economy. It was on the performance of 2 tech companies that had good earnings. So this is maybe the clearest time that the stock market, which isn't performing particularly well, is really disassociated from a lot of what else is going on in the economy, a lot of uncertainty for consumers, buyers, manufacturers, business people who really don't know where to twist or turn.
I think that this is the new normal. And the question is, how long can it last? And at what point are there medium or longer term implications? I mean, for a while, you can say there are tariffs, there are no tariffs. There are tariffs at 50%, there are tariffs at 154%. The stock market is responding, the stock market isn't responding. At some point, all of that uncertainty and all of that chaos become the status quo, and people respond accordingly, and businesses respond accordingly, and the markets respond accordingly. And that locks into, place, I think, an economy that does not help Donald Trump heading into 2026. So we'll see. I don't think this can go on much longer. The ups and downs, I don't think can go on much longer. The other thing I would note is, Donald Trump a couple of days ago was very, very angry with Jeff Bezos because Amazon, well aware of the fact that their prices are going through the roof because of tariffs, wants to post on their website how much of this price differential is because of the Trump tariffs. That's the kind of information that when voters find out that this is a Donald Trump tariff, causes even more of, causes more economic implications for the Republicans and for the administration. And it's also the beginning of the souring of what looked to be, Bezos and Trump getting along really, really well.
Kind of like Musk and Trump, which is now unraveling, and questions about whether the board at Tesla is looking for a new CEO. The Wall Street Journal last night said that they were, and they had contacted major search group to be able to go out and do what they do in looking for sort of that replacement. Tesla this morning denied that claim by the Wall Street Journal. We'll find out over the next few months. Listen, as always, thank you so much. Congratulations on another successful academic year at the University of Virginia, and we look forward to having you back next week.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be back. Listen, it's nonstop news at GoLocal. We'll have it throughout the day and into the night. A lot of things we're working on, and we'll have a ton more tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.